Support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Oshman Family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Oshman Family JCC is an incubator for new expressions of Jewish identity. It creates innovative Jewish learning, celebrations, and arts programs that inspire personal connections to people and ideas from across the Jewish world. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 183, Intentional Community. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And today we're looking at another early-stage grassroots organization put together by regular Jews to try and meet their needs and those of their friends and neighbors. Our guests today, Sara Levy Linden and Shira Rutman, are leaders of the San Francisco Urban Kibbutz, an intentional community of mostly families with young children that's built around Jewish values. Its mission is to enable Jewish and multi-faith families to build Jewish life together to help their families thrive and find meaning in San Francisco. One especially interesting dimension of the San Francisco Urban Kibbutz is that it's a non-institutional initiative led both by folks who work professionally in the Jewish community and also by folks who have professional careers in other fields. And our guests today are one of each. Sara Levy Linden was formerly a biomedical engineer, but a mahjong business that she founded led her to transition to becoming a Jewish community engagement specialist as a program manager at the San Francisco JCC. And she has also been an administrator at the Jewish Community High School in San Francisco. Sara Levy Linden recently moved to Los Angeles to be closer to family, and she's now freelancing for the Jewish creativity organization Reboot. Shira Rutman has not yet been captured by the gravitational field of Jewish professional work, and she is still a San Francisco-based public health researcher focused on vulnerable populations. Sara Levy Linden, Shira Rutman, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
Thank you.
Exciting to be here. Thank you.
Well, let's get started with a little bit of background. I'd love it if you could share a little bit about sort of the origin story of this urban kibbutz that you've created.
So what we did is there was the weekly paper here, J Weekly, had talked about, the headline was "Families Squeezed Out of San Francisco, Leaving." And it resonated with me and my family, but at the same time, we are like, we're going to be one of those families that stay. And so I thought, what could we do? Yes, it's expensive here, cost of living, but what could we do positively to work around it? Because the cost of living isn't going to change. And so we had already been practicing sharing a lot of things amongst our friends that happened to be Jewish. Several of us lived on a street in Noe Valley called Alvarado. And we just started sharing stuff, which is what happens when you have young kids, whether it's sharing supplies. We had a small apartment. Our friend across the street had a house. They could house our parents when they came in. They happened to have 2 cars and we had 1 car. So once in a while, if we need an extra car, we would share. Our kids were about 6 months apart. So we were constantly passing things back and forth. And it felt good. And then on top of that, we were surrounded by this caring community through our friends in preschool who people are bringing us meals constantly as we were having our kids, and just really inspired by that and wanted to kind of put that out there. And how could we add, just make that our Jewish practice, is taking care of each other and being responsible, including reducing our environmental footprint by sharing things, taking care of each other. And just like, that's our Jewish, that's what speaks to us. And so we were doing that as of 2013. And then come maternity leave. My maternity leave is like my one brain project. I got to use my brain again. It felt great writing this editorial in the J Weekly, and that explaining that. And that really sparked some ideas. It sparked conversations amongst our friends. And from there, we just were collecting enthusiasm, and it felt really good. And we were like, yeah, let's use this as a way to bring other people together. And if you like this, let's do it. So one of the things you might say is a strength and a weakness of ours is we don't have a lot of like set structure. So we don't have membership. It's really like what you put in is what you get out. And so it's really, it starts with, most of the people that are our core I say the core members of our group, we all have been working together in different capacities around the Jewish community over the time. So we've just automatically are I'd say we're like-minded people, and we've been patient with each other. We also have gone through having young kids, so that kind of breaks you down a little bit and gives you humility. So I think in there, we're all just being human and trying to be the best humans we can be.
So Shira, can you give us some examples of what you actually are doing now? It's about 6 years since this initial op-ed. What does it look like today? Are people actually living together?
We're not living together, although there are a good portion of us who are in the north part of San Francisco, and so not too far away from each other. It's nice to run into Sarah on her walk to work and run into other members of our group who go to school across the street from our house. And so that's actually, even though San Francisco is a small city, for me, it's a big advantage to have people walking distance because we prefer to live that way. It's one of the reasons we like to be in San Francisco. And so we did actually talk a lot about the idea of co-housing and how could we really support each other, and is it even possible? And I think many of us felt like it was just not realistic in this city, and we considered it, but decided what else could we do? How else could we? Just like Sarah has said before, that there are ways of being in community without living together, and so we're doing that. And so since I've been a part of the group, and our family has been engaged with this group for, I guess it's 1.5 years or maybe 2 years now. And we have started to form some structure within the group. So I was thinking of, we have like a babysitting co-op where we, have points and support each other in that way. We have a social justice committee. So that group so far has done a couple different things. One being just volunteering in the community together. So as a community building, and also being, members of our broader community. And the other committees include Jewish learning, the calendar. So the Jewish calendar really helping to form. A lot of us felt that was an important way that can guide our activities. So some of the things we've done are make Shabbat, make Havdalah. We've had a Tu B'Shvat in the park where we've had a Tu B'Shvat Seder that we wandered through Golden Gate Park and stopped for different pieces of our Seder at different points in the park together. And we had a Passover Pesach in the park as well, where we had activities for the kids that were related to the themes of the holidays. So those are some examples.
So talk to us. So you could have set about creating something along these lines, just generally, forgetting Jewishness or Judaism, with folks who are interested in a similar kind of communal process. And I'm curious, why do this Jewishly? What drew you specifically to do this through the lens of Judaism, when you could have just done it with, people?
For our family, Jewish practice is a really critical component of being a part of this group, and the opportunity of this flexibility in our practice is also really important. The opportunity to be creative. As my family has grown, each of us, there are 4 of us, we have 2 children and my husband and myself, and each of us is really needing something different in our Jewish practice at different stages of our life. Even, my kids are 6 years old and 10 years old, and even at this point, it's different from a few years ago, the way that they connect to Judaism and the way that we do as individuals. As my kids have gotten older, I have more space to bring in intellectual learning. I have more space to bring in more personal kind of energy, to bring in spiritual seeking and practice. And I think the opportunity for our group to evolve with us is something that I think is really special about the group being small, about it being organic, having some structure but not too much. And that's really different from what we might experience in a larger institution that just can't necessarily grow with our children and our personal desires. And so so far this group has really, to me, provided the most opportunity in that way. And that each of us brings something different. So for myself, the way that we do Jewish is really an important piece. And so that's something that I really want to bring to the group. Somebody else brings community organizing. Somebody else brings, that connection. I'm not a Jewish professional, but there are a number of them in our group. And so, they bring a different connection to Judaism than I would.
I want to back out a little bit. So you've mentioned a couple times there's not a ton of structure, but I am curious. In the structure that there is present in your group. And I guess what I would ask is, like, on sort of a basic level, what's the rhythm of this urban kibbutz? Like what if somebody were to, like, shadow you for a month or two, like, what would they see? What do you gather around? Where do you gather? How frequently? What does it look like to be in your shoes for a space of time and sort of experience, whether it's holidays, whether it's programming, whether it's even just, social gatherings together?
Our core group has a monthly meeting. And one of the nice things is that one of our core households works at the Jewish Community Center, and so can help us with a space, which is a trick in San Francisco, finding a space to gather. So we meet monthly, and we've through those meetings been forming some more of the structure. So we created these subcommittees, one of them being the calendar. And that calendar I see is really forming the structure of our day-to-day. So we've started to move towards this idea of having a monthly Shabbat or a monthly Havdalah. At each of the Jewish holidays, we try to have some getting together. That's really, for some people, the only way that they're going to observe whatever the Jewish holiday is that's happening. They may not be going to a synagogue or another place to practice or observe that. And so, and then we have the other thing that kind of forms the flow on a regular basis is I would say the babysitting co-op and the activities. We've had a book reading group 2 or 3 times. Some of us are interested in adding in a Rosh Chodesh gathering, but I would say that the consistency and the rhythm of the group is still forming. So recently we created a mission and a vision that we shared out to the wider community, and I think we're at a turning point with an opportunity to say, okay, this is what you're actually, because there's been such an evolution from the really beginning origin of inspiration for the group that Sara had with her family and the communities at that time, and what it looks like now and the communities that are, still invested. And so I think we're interested in saying, okay, this is kind of what we want this group to be. We want to communicate that more clearly to people who might be interested, and then say, are we going to do this? In what way are we really committing to each other? And then I think that rhythm is something that we hope to deepen even more through that.
I actually want to expand on the origin story. So I gave you guys the part 1, which was kind of just, our organic nature, being a village, how we want to live our lifestyle as a family, wherever we live, frankly. But part 2 is that I received a small grant, a seed grant from Hazon and the Israeli Ministry of Diaspora called Hakel. And that's the Hakel is the Jewish Intentional Community Incubator. And there are, I might not do it justice, but let's say there's like 30 communities per year right now that are getting picked across North America, I believe, maybe even diaspora probably, sorry. So there are about 30 to 40 communities that are picked each year to be part of this incubator cohort for 3 years. And so this happened to us in 2015. I applied for it. I heard about it. And this is what gave us some structure and, frankly, me personally, a lot of confidence in pursuing this idea. So there was the origin story that started with the J Weekly and really kind of getting the idea out there. And maybe now we're in proof of concept thanks to this Hakel grant, which I would say it's a small C grant, so nowhere near, right? Our original idea was co-housing, nowhere near that, but kind of the community building skills, the networking, I've been very inspired by just hearing other people's stories, because intentional communities can look all different ways. It doesn't have to be co-housing, can literally be around music, around food. Like us, I think we're kind of around raising kids, frankly, but trying to be flourishing human beings ourselves. And hopefully that will lead to our kids learning and growing as flourishing human beings as well. But the opportunity there that came in that's been very significant is going to, it includes going to the Jewish Intentional Community Conference once a year. And then also a trip to Israel, which I went last November. And it really was like community building 401, or like the master class of community building. I mean, there was no sightseeing. It was all going to kibbutz and moshav every day, just seeing mission-driven communities. And that really inspired me. And another friend who went from our community, another partner from a household went, and it just was this amazing experience, both from being able to observe, but also to be in a group of 20 people, because there were about 20 of us representing different communities. And it was its own lab of people getting along and being human beings and being tired after jet lag and, or being hungry or not getting the right food. And I mean, that's really what community is about, is like learning being respectful of each other's needs and kind of meeting each other halfway when it makes sense. And, but I think that was a big part of the inspiration and got us to, or got me, and I hope us, to this place of really being able to focus around, there is so much work to be done and so many small successes we can have without housing. And that's why housing has basically been dropped. And I feel like we're really rocking with our taking care of each other and just being. What that translates to is, like, we are slow about things. Like, we try to get together once a month for our steering committee, but we don't always. We try to get together Shabbat. It doesn't always happen, or maybe just two of us do, and that's enough because that would work. But whereas I feel like when you're in a more traditional organizational setting, you are bounded by certain obligations that are important. But for us, especially at this time in our lives, when things are just constantly changing with young kids and cost of living and everything else, like, we really just appreciate each other and be there for each other and do the best we can.
There's a lot of amazing creative Jewish practices going on in the Bay Area. People who are, returning to the land and farming. There's, going into the wilderness. I've participated in really rich Rosh Chodesh groups. And I think what our group has that's unique is bringing some of those threads into one, so that I'm not having to go to one group and then another group and then another group, but we're trying to bring bits and nuggets and seeds from each of those pieces. And that's really what our committees are. They're not very formal. We have a phone call, two of us, and that's a committee meeting. We went for ramen, and that was a committee meeting. But again, it's really a way of bringing each of these pieces that suits the whole family into one group, and not having to seek that out in lots of different places, and then not having to think about sustaining it in a large organization, or having to kind of mold ourselves into the format and the structure that a larger organization has to maintain.
I want to drill down a little bit on the word kibbutz, because if you ask most people what a kibbutz is, I think what they would say is they're those things in Israel where people live in some sort of shared place. I mean, they would talk about housing isn't the right word, but a shared agricultural community where they are sharing some non-trivial amount of their lives with one another. And people talk about this through the lens of socialism, and people talk about this historically and how it's changed. Your organization, through the use of the word kibbutz, is looking at that model, but it's also very different. And so I'm trying to distill, what are the pieces of that you also have? So if somebody's listening and I'm confused, this is I thought I was going to hear about chickens and goats because we're talking about kibbutzes, but we're not talking about that. I'm curious what your response to them would be. And then the add-on to that, this is half question, half Lex thought, is even that way we think of kibbutz is actually a very, very new way of understanding the word kibbutz. So kibbutz historically just means gathering, and it's largely been linked to the ingathering of exiles. Like kibbutz galuyot is the long Hebrew phrase, and liturgically it's all the parts where we're talking about like Jews being spread all over the place, and hopefully there's going to be a time when they gather together, and kibbutz being the word that implies gathering. And so like maybe on some level what you're doing by having a kind of gathering that isn't an agricultural community is actually kind of a shout out to that older sense of what a kibbutz is. But basically all this is to say, like, why are you called a kibbutz and not some other form of, community?
So again, when this first idea started, we would talk about it and we'd say, well, it's kind of like a moshav. A moshav is more of a village in that people have their individual ownership but come together in community. In the United States, it might look like a condo association, if you will, where you have your own private spaces, but you contribute to the community. And when I would explain that, if you were in the know, you would say, oh, moshav. But if you weren't in the know, you'd be like a kibbutz. So whether very Jewish backgrounds, most people, and even non-Jewish, would come up with like, oh, that sounds like a kibbutz. And I'd say, yeah, like a kibbutz. So that's kind of how they got the name. And frankly, we had branding stuff. Should we be moshav? Should we be kibbutz? What should we be? And then recently a friend said, you're kind of like a kibbutz without walls. My vision or version of what I think kibbutz did well and what I'd like to see continue is optimizing talents and sharing resources. Shira has this rich background and seeking spirituality that she brings to the table. I have a community organizing background that I bring to the table. And how can we bring that to the table and then resource share, and we all get to benefit from it?
What kinds of resources do or don't exist currently that could sustain the kind of work that you're trying to do? Because it does feel to me like what you're describing is potentially a transformational way of thinking about how Jewish life is organized. That instead of understanding that our family's Jewish life is going to be built around this institution like a synagogue or JCCs, which are built to have families become members and then have their Jewish life sort of surrounding that institution, I can imagine a different way that Jewish life might be organized in the future, where people's families' Jewish life are based on these ephemeral comings together of 5 or 10 families in these kind of time-limited condo association-like intentional communities. But the institutional world of Judaism becomes built to support that structure. And so it's about pumping resources into those institutions, which probably isn't largely money, but I'd love for you to reflect on that, because it feels like organizing it that way. Look, I have to pay my family's bills. There's no reason that some philanthropist should subsidize my family's existence necessarily. But instead, it's saying that, well, maybe I don't know how to best have Jewish experiences for this group of 5 or 10 families. So it would be really helpful to me if there was someone out there developing ideas of that nature. But I'd love to hear from you both about sort of how you see what you're creating, how leadership plays in, what kinds of resources feed it, and, anything else that you think is relevant.
Some of the things that I was thinking about in terms of resources and what could be helpful to support our group, I was thinking about, one of the, some of the events that we've had in our homes have had, 40 people at them. And we have these small San Francisco apartments, and it's a lot with the kids running around. It's wonderful. It's really amazing, to just have like a pot of chili and the people going and gathering for blessings and then scattering. On the other hand, I think sometimes we really do need space. And one of the things that actually, larger institutions have is space. And there are times where I think a partnership could really be valuable, and potentially if in the institutions had some more flexibility in how they used that space, I think they could better support these organic communities like ours. So that's just a very practical thing. And another thing that I think about is the rituals that we have. And I think, my family, my husband and I, something that we've done for years is just really make our own. We just make it up. I go online, I pull from different places. Ritual Well, I like a lot. But I want to pull this piece that has meaning for me and this prayer that has meaning for me. And my husband is in early child education. And so for him, he thinks about how do we make it meaningful and practical for the kids in our group, and how do we keep their attention. Having a manual would probably not be the way to go, because it really does have to speak to that group and what they need. And another manual is kind of like, I don't know if this is the right analogy, but it's like a prayer book. It's like, well, I kind of like this, but that translation does not make me feel comfortable. And I don't think I want to say king. I kind of want to say this prayer because we've been saying it our whole lives. And I kind of feel good about this because it's the tune that touches my soul. On the other hand, I don't know if I really want to say those words. And so again, that flexibility, the opportunity to pull together something that has real meaning for us and that just practically works for our families to do it. Like, wow, this is long enough. This we can do walking in the park. This one, we can do different seasons or something. And I think, but something that could help people navigate how to create those rituals might be really helpful. So not necessarily create a resource for people, but help them design those rituals, because not everybody is a community gatherer. Not everybody knows how to host. And some of those practical elements, I think, could be helpful.
I'm reflecting and deeply in love with the analogy that Shira, you made to the prayer book. I'm super, super into that. By the way, mostly because I think that we should actually stop making the prayer books in the way that we've made. So you were talking about how it resembled a prayer book, where sort of in that context, it at least makes a little more sense to have a manual type structure. I actually think even there, we should stop making these decade-long committees of preparation prayer books that then go out to the entire country without any ability to customize them. I think they should just make a digital template that communities can take the pieces they want and also have those trainer for trainer kinds of modalities where people learn how to then customize it. So that's a random unsolicited thought, but I think that it's extra true in your context. And I have, following up on that, a micro question and a macro question. My micro question is just, to help give some color to this, I'm curious if each of you can just sort of name a moment where the full glory of the kibbutz shone through, where it sort of encapsulates the magic of your community. I'm curious what you would flag as your group soaring at its maximum heights when that happened. And the macro question related to that is what would change about the world or the universe if everybody, or at least many, many, many more people, did what you're doing?
So a shining moment, which was a very small group, which felt wonderful, was when we had a small book club meet at someone's house before Rosh Hashanah and the high holidays. We met and talked about Alan Liu's book, This Is Real and You Are Completely Unprepared. And having the outlet to both have a group that we could send this announcement out. I had this pet project. I read this book personally, I read this book the year before, was so inspired by it, and had this pet project that I want to lead a book club around it. And so I now had the platform that I could send out, 40 emails and say, this is the night we're meeting and we're going to talk about this book. And 5 other people showed up. It was wonderful. And we had this great conversation. And again, back to that kind of nourishing feeling, breath of fresh air, preparation for high holidays, frankly. That was a smaller, a high success, small version, but then a more macro to represent our group as the urban kibbutz specifically is walking into Golden Gate Park for our Tu B'Shvat Seder. Just the fact that we were doing a Tu B'Shvat Seder in Golden Gate Park. I love the idea that it was actually Shira and her husband, Adam, who led it. And it really highlighted their skill set and joy of being outdoors and doing Judaism their way, and then bringing their background into it and leading this really cool Seder that was a little bit of noshing, a little bit of singing, a little bit of pausing and reflecting in the environment we're in, and doing that stage by stage. And that was with a larger group, right? Maybe 30 people showed, let's say. But that itself was like a quintessential San Francisco Jewish experience.
The reason that it was a highlight for me is that it really felt like we all came together and touched on all of these different pieces. So one of the aspects of the Tu B'Shvat Seder, we've had Tu B'Shvat Seders in different ways before, even some outdoors, but being in the Redwood Grove in Golden Gate Park for this Seder, we also decided to incorporate a social justice piece, which was doable, again, for this group and for our children. So we talked about how Tu B'Shvat is actually kind of like this Jewish Arbor Day and an opportunity to think about the ways that historically we have also, as Jews, thought about contributing to our environment. And we did just a trash pickup and we talked about that. So it wasn't just a Tu B'Shvat Seder, but it was also a way of really being in an environment that had meaning to us, thinking about how we're a part of that historically as a people, and also how we're doing it with our kids. We're just picking up trash in the park, and we're also singing, we're praying, just saying the Kiddush is something that's so simple. It's not a long prayer. It's not, many people know it. And even if you're not practicing on a regular basis, Judaism, the Kiddush is something that probably can come to you quickly. And so, but even something as simple as that, bringing together all of these elements of meaning for us brings it to another level. It's, for us going to a synagogue, and for many people, this really works for them, and that's great. But for us, it's, going to a synagogue and sitting in a room and reading a book with other people is just not suiting all of those parts of our humanity in the same way. And our children aren't going to sit there, so they're over in childcare, maybe, or maybe we even had to get a babysitter because they don't have childcare, so it's just not really suiting our full family and our full humanity. And so what spirituality looks like, what religious practice looks like is so different to different families and individuals. And this, I think, is a way to seek out, what does that look like for you? What are the bits and pieces to pull together for you, and how to do that in community, and how are the other people in your group supporting you in that process? That's something that we all need in life in general, and maybe as Jews in this time in particular.
Can you talk a little bit about the different people? I think you said there are 30 different families that have a relationship to the group. Can you talk about who they are? Is there a very wide range, a relatively narrow range, in terms of life stage on the one hand, in terms of Jewish connections, what kind of Judaism they subscribe to, and other kinds of parameters? Can you give us a little bit of a window into who's participating, and why is it mostly people that are, how do they get involved? I guess I'm asking, are they friends of friends, or is it that people heard this is happening and some people came and said, I want to be part of that? Or how has your group come together?
We all tend to have younger kids. So I would say we have kids in the span of infant through 10. And a good amount of us come from one Jewish preschool in the city that is already dedicated to full-time working parents. So there's the one Jewish preschool in the city that offers an 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. program. A lot of us come from that one because we are two working families, and a lot of word of mouth. And then I would add that expand, of course, that, we are more multi-faith than not, I would say. And you have everything from, our core group is really interesting in that, like, my husband and I met at a Jewish young adult event. I think Shira and Adam met at a a break fast. Another couple I know met on J-Date, another in our committee met on J-Date. And then you have like 2 out of 5 of us are, multi-faith of the core. And then that expands out to, and we just came up with this language, came up with this interesting, as we're doing our vision, we had the word interfaith for Jewish and interfaith families. And it was great because we had this back and forth chatter, interfaith, that doesn't feel right. And we came up with multi-faith, and that just feels perfect. So I would say, again, we're all coming from all different backgrounds. The other big thing to know is that I would say the majority of us are unaffiliated. My husband and I, we met at a young adult event at a temple. So we are affiliated. We will always be affiliated. But yet we're still trying to create this smaller group and interact with others. But what we needed is we wanted to be together without that label, or without you go to this one or you go to that one. No, we just wanted to do it this way, our way. And we still capitalized on the great programming around the city. You know, at Purim, there's amazing carnivals and celebrations and Megillah readings. And so instead of doing our own thing, we say, okay, these are the captains that are at each one. Go see Beth or go see Seth or David at this one. Or we say, okay, guys, we'll all be at this one. Come if you want, go to your other, but not always reinventing the wheel. There is a lot of great stuff here, but still having those personal connections once you're there makes a difference.
So I want to dig deeper on the question of needs, but I think it's really important for us to think about what are the needs that Jewish people and their extended families, what are the needs that they actually have? And it's interesting because a lot of times we've talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs in different ways. And I have kind of said, and Lex has pushed back on me a little bit, that I've said that Jews, for the most part, are prosperous in America today. Meaning, and what I mean by that is not that they're rich, but they're not, for the most part, struggling to put food on the table. They're not, for the most part, struggling with anti-Semitism to the extent that they're being banned from all kinds of organizations as they used to be. And so what I mean by that is that sort of fundamentally, they are at this higher level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where your basic needs are met, and now you're looking for these more life meaning type of needs. That said, and I've certainly experienced this, and I'm almost sort of very recently coming out of this phase of life of having young kids. On the one hand, I may not be struggling with those Maslow's hierarchy of needs issues in terms of putting food on my family's table. However, the cost of Judaism is extremely high, both in terms of money and time that's expected of one who is feeling like, oh yeah, I'm doing it right. I'm affiliated. I'm coming to synagogue regularly. That's very expensive in terms of time and money. And it's not necessarily that I don't have that money or I don't have that time. It's just that I'm so bogged down by other needs for my money and my time that it just feels like I can't handle that. And so as a result, you kind of disaffiliate, but it's not necessarily, it is actually because of cost, but it's not because of cost in the sense that, otherwise I'm going to starve to death. It's in terms of cost in that, I'm just going to drive me crazy. If I have to have another 3 hours a week of my time, I can barely hold it together as it is. I'm wondering if you could reflect on that and give us some sense of both how folks, whether it's you or folks in your group, have struggled with those elements or others, and how they have perhaps found the what they're looking for not available in the existing Jewish institutions, even though those institutions mean very, very well and are trying their best, but they're somehow not able to supply what people are really needing. I'd love to hear you reflect on that.
There's one thing that I'm thinking about related to young children, and you mentioned this idea of sort of just recently coming out of that, and I think our family, we feel that way as well. Our children aren't toddlers anymore, and interestingly, I think the programming for this kind of middle-aged youth is really lacking. They're also not necessarily wanting to, and at Jewish institutions, also, a 10-year-old isn't necessarily going to want to go to childcare or, be babysat in a room for an hour or more. And so, that's one just very straightforward piece. There's certainly, I know there's like Hebrew school or Jewish programming in that way, but that's really just more of an education model. And so it's really a missed opportunity to continue to engage families. And then the next time you really have to come around is bar bat mitzvah, right? So there's this gap for a family in being a part of the community in an intentional way at these institutions that I think could be thought about more. Again, the fact that our group has the flexibility to try to serve and respond to all of those needs, whereas a larger institution is just going to move a lot slower in that way and isn't going to grow up with my family the way this group, might. We're all, are growing up together in that way. Our children are growing up together, and that's where we can maybe more easily adapt to the needs that we each have.
So on a personal level, the last couple of years, my family just needs, so we want to be healthy. That's how we make decisions. We want to be healthy. But what's happened is, with the young kids around and being in our 30s and 40s, having kids later in life, like myself, had a career before and now kind of taking a step back, that's been a challenge. And then, so I'm both learning to have a different identity. I'm also learning to be in a partnership because, again, we're getting married later in life and we just need space. I need space for my own self-care. My husband and I need space to just be adults and have conversations and not be transactionally talking about kid care and work. And so that's where this group has come in, and part of our bringing it to is how can we build these resources to meet us mentally, physically, spiritually, because we do have a roof over our head. We do have food, like you're saying, but at the same time, we just don't feel well. Mentally, physically, we don't feel well. And, there's another example of this amazing Jewish after-school program in San Francisco that exists. And, it's a little on the high end for our budget. But at the same time, I'm not even applying to financial aid because I have to get my child there 2 days a week at 2:30 to 5:30. And that just doesn't work in our lifestyle, the logistics of it. So the logistics to me are crazy making. It's an amazing program. But again, it's that leading to the edge of we're already overcommitted. Am I rushing into work? Am I just getting out just in time to pick up a kid? And, is my child going to be in a good mood today? Is there going to be a tantrum? I say we're all a little grumpier at the end of the day. So just trying to reduce and simplify. And by doing it with our everyday life through our friends, our community, our urban kibbutz, that feels healthier. That feels shleimut or holistic or whole.
I'm thinking of listeners out there who are hearing this and thinking, I could give that a go. I could give a whirl at this urban kibbutz game, or maybe suburban or rural kibbutz game, depending on where the context is. What would you say to those folks as they do so? Both, like, if you have any practical words of advice, and also just what would your pitch be to take them from this place of musing, pondering, maybe this is a good idea, to the next place of actually giving it a go?
It's just as important to have the small as it is to have the big. And so where I found a lot of value is, or what I would encourage people to do, is find one other household that you really feel all in on, and just try to be with each other and try to help each other, try to listen, enjoy those great times too. And then, give each other a break when things are tough or, life is happening. And then from there, ideally let it expand out. So when you are talking and you talk to a friend that, hey, that sounds kind of cool, I want to try that too. Great. Join us for this dinner or join us for this thing. And just, again, continue to be with each other and not always have an agenda. Thinking as family and what you would do for the other person or how you would be. Another thing that came out when we were in Israel that just like a light bulb went off when I was sitting in these kibbutzes, and my mind is blown that they're sharing, 100 individuals are sharing one bank account, but it didn't start overnight. It started in the youth movements. My association here, youth movements, is camp, youth group, whatever you name it. But even this group right now that we're in, I would say none of the people in our immediate group in San Francisco I went to camp with, or I knew in Swifty, shout out to Nifty Southwest. But at the same time, they feel like camp friends. And so I get that feeling and trust my feeling. And again, be patient with it. It's not something that it's not a condo, right? I walked out of the Israel trip saying, I am not going into co-housing. I am not going into a condo, because that is a contractual agreement. And I really want to invest the time. It's going to take longer, but I want to invest the time to find the people that I really see eye to eye with and understand, because I think in the long game, that's going to be better for my family, myself, and the greater community and the world for that matter.
I think about kind of a way to imagine starting a group like ours is, when I grew up, my family was in a Havara as a part of our synagogue. And so that is a group that's put together often by the synagogue with families that might have something in common, and they come together for Shabbats or other opportunities. And, to me, our group is kind of like a Chavurah plus. We've added in all of these pieces, but starting out with just making Shabbat. And if it's not Shabbat, like Friday nights are really rough, for us to try to gather or host. And so we've actually leaned more for our family on Havdalah. Saturday night, Saturday evening, we can do that. We can come together and make a ritual and then wind our way into a Saturday night together. But starting out with maybe one consistent activity that you're doing that's centered around the Jewish cycles of the year or of the week. And then adding on to that, thinking about what has meaning for us? What are the needs of our group? Is it related to supporting our children and our families together? Is it related to, sharing resources? I've got a vacuum that's broken and can I use yours? Can I borrow your car? And very practical things. Is it about political or community and social action that you can just start adding on? Do we want to do Jewish rituals or Jewish prayer or spirituality, but we need to find the right place to do it? Do we want to be at a playground and just try it out?
I absolutely can't think of a more appropriate way to close a Judaism Unbound episode than with try it out. Try it out. That's our motto, basically. So thank you both so much for joining us, for helping us think about what we can try out, and for helping our listeners do the same.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
And thanks, of course, also to all of you out there listening. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we hope that you'll tune in again in the future. We want to close out this conversation in the same way that we always do, by encouraging you to be in touch with us. And there are a wide variety of ways for you to do that. First, you can head to our Facebook page, Judaism Unbound. Second, you can check out our Twitter feed at Judaism Unbound. Third, you can go to our website, judaismunbound.com. And last but not least, you can hit us up via email at dan@judaismunbound.com or lex@judaismunbound.com. The last request we'd like to make is that we greatly appreciate any amount of financial donation that you're able to send our way. And you can do that on either a monthly recurring basis or on a one-time gift basis at judaismunbound.com/donate. So thanks so much for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.